prime thing is you have to win.
There you go. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Hey, Mark, settle down a little bit.
All right, we got that intro fix. Welcome back to the Just Win podcast. I'm Ted Wynn. That's Tashan Reed. That's Vic Tafur, and the draft is coming up next week. And Pete Carroll and John Spytek have talked since, and we're all just trying to decipher what they say and find clues to what they're gonna do at number 6. How you guys doing?
Good, man. About less than a week away from the draft. It's almost here, almost over. So we can stop with all the mock drafts. But excited to see what they do in the first round.
Yeah, there weren't many secrets shared today at the press conference, that's for sure. So I think they're trying to, keep it a mystery. But everyone has them, kind of linked up with Ashen Genty. So we'll see if that holds true.
There's a little bit of secrecy. I saw Pete Carroll kind of give John Spytek a little shrug, like, "Hey, be careful when talking about Ashen Genty." What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I asked him directly about Genty. His name had been mentioned a few times, but I wanted to see what he would say. And it did seem like Pete was a little, nudge, nudge, wink, wink on that one. But honestly, didn't talk about any prospect. Like pretty much anybody that we asked about them specifically, they just wouldn't touch it. But Spytek did say that, he pointed out Saquon Barkley and the difference he made with the Eagles. And he said that he values the running back position. And I think a lot of people are kind of coming around on that train after the year Saquon had and Derrick Henry and Josh Jacobs. They've sort of given new life to investing in the running back position. But I don't think it's like, I know we've talked about this before. Like, is it just smoke screen? Is he just, kind of bullshitting? But I do think they have legitimate interest in him. It's not a done deal or guarantee that they're going to take him because, for one, it's not even a sure thing that he's going to be there at 6. But there could be some other players that surprisingly fall down the board. So they haven't made up their minds like everybody seems to think they have. But I do think he's a legitimate candidate to go 6 if he's there.
Yeah, you can always say, they should take the best player available. But in this case, he very well may be the best player available. So I think that fits the requirement there. And again, he also fits a need. They don't have anything really at running back besides Raheem Mostert right now. And he's probably more of a number 2 guy at this point in his career. So definitely with Pete Carroll's offense, he wants to run the ball. A guy like Genty would be, the bell cow guy who'd come in and play pretty much 3 downs and kind of have impact all over the field. So it makes sense from many aspects.
Yeah, I think Spytek has done a really good job of talking with both sides of his mouth throughout this whole process. Like he'll talk about not devaluing the running back position, but he'll also talk about the importance of, building the team correctly and kind of hinting at, building through the trenches. He did talk about Saquon, but he also said he came into a very well-built team already. So I do understand. I think he does understand and respects the, so-called right way to team build, which is typically seen as building through the trenches. So we'll see what happens there. But also, again, it's a hard decision because Genty is just so, he's so good. Like it's hard to pass up on a player that is going to be good. And running back hit rate is a lot higher than, let's say, a tackle or a corner. Like obviously when you hit on those guys, those impact positions, it obviously impacts your team in a different way than a running back. But like running backs, rarely bust. I mean, like we think about Trent Richardson, but like those guys that get drafted high, I mean, it's just pretty much plug and play, and usually those guys work out.
Yeah, and I mean, like, obviously the whole best player available thing isn't absolute. Like, if the best player available is the Penn State tight end, like, they're not going to take them just because, like, need is going to factor into it, and Spytek did acknowledge that. But I think with the Raiders roster and where it's at, like, they have some pressing starting needs, what we've talked about, whether it's running back, receiver, linebacker, cornerback, nickelback. But they also just need depth across the board. Even positions that might be deep right now, like, it might be a position like linebacker where they have a bunch of guys that are going to be free agents next year, And so you're not just drafting for the immediate impact, but also for the future. And so, outside of tight end, I don't think they can really go wrong drafting at any position.
I think what makes it tough, we talked about this in the past, is that it's such a deep running back draft. There's so many guys in this draft you can probably take there's probably 5 or 6 starting running backs in this draft, and some of the guys who maybe have the upside of being a starting running back at some point. So if you want to go a different direction and get a running back later, it makes sense. Make sure you hit on that running back. I think with Spytek, look at his history with the Buccaneers. They hit a home run, Bucky Irving in round 4. So that tells you maybe that's a blueprint for him if he wants to not go with the stud running back at 1 and go, for one of the guys later on. So it's definitely, I'm sure, a tough decision for them. I'm sure they've gone back and forth on it, and we'll see what happens on Thursday.
Yeah, and there were some comments about trading back. Do you guys want to get into that?
Yeah, I mean, like Spicek kind of insinuated like he's happy with where they're at in terms of draft capital. They do have 9 picks, and I think 3 of those picks are in the top 70 picks, which is pretty good. But I think if they come on the clock at 6, and let's say there are 3 or 4 different players that they have graded similarly, or even 2 or 3, and they feel comfortable trading back a couple spots and picking up an extra, second round pick or third round pick, I think they'd be willing to do that as well. I don't think they're just going to move back just for the sake of moving back. If it's like an extra day 3 pick or something, like they have plenty of those. But I think if somebody's offering a day 2 pick with the intention of moving up a couple spots and they don't have to fall too far back, I think it's something that they'd at least answer the call about.
And also, the other half of that is who are teams trading up for. Like, I think, we've talked about, for months now, Shedeur Sanders, like first he was going to go second, and now maybe the Raiders want him at 6, and now the talk is he probably won't be going anytime soon. Maybe he lasts, to the 19 and 21 range. So I think if you are the Raiders, you're hoping for a team to kind of call you and trade up for Shedeur Sanders. Maybe that call's not coming because the buzz on him has been, I don't want to say negative, but definitely going in one direction where it's not like he's going to be a guy in demand at the top of this draft.
Yeah, the sense I've been getting from talking to people is a lot of people like Shedeur, but they don't love Shedeur. And to take a quarterback that high, you pretty much gotta love him because you're banking on them being your guy moving forward. And maybe the Saints at number 9 are a team that inquire about it. With Derek Carr's status for the season being up in the air with a shoulder injury, and maybe there's a team that's desperate to try to get Genty. Like, I don't know, maybe Chicago Bears at 10 with Ben Johnson coming off of having, those 2 stud running backs with the Lions. Maybe he wants to get a stud of his own in Genty and move up and grab him. So, but it does seem like the most likely outcome is that they're going to have to stick and pick at 6. But you never know. Things can. We have to see how the first 5 picks play out as well. Like, I don't know, maybe if Abdul Carter somehow falls to 6, like maybe that gets more teams interested. So we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, the noise around this draft is there aren't a lot of true elite prospects. There's just a lot of very good players. So it's hard to trade down in this kind of draft because there's not guys that teams are willing to give up a ton of capital with. It would rather have their draft picks and use those to get a larger number of good players rather than trade draft capital and try to trade up to get a guy. I think outside of Genty, Carter, and Hunter, there's just not a lot of guys that I think teams are willing to part picks to go up and get. But he did say that a trade down would be more likely probably in the 2nd or 3rd round, right?
I think he was speaking more so about the NFL as a whole. He thinks there's going to be more trade activity at the top of the 2nd round, more so than the top of the 1st round. And I guess he could also probably mean that maybe there's some teams that are high in the 2nd round that try to move back into the 1st round to try to go get a quarterback. Like, we've heard a lot of noise about, like, whether it's Jalen Milroe or Tyler Shuck or maybe even Jackson Dart being in that range of players that a team could try to come up and get. Maybe like the Browns, for example, if they take a 9 quarterback at 2, maybe they try to trade up from the top of the 2nd round to go get their guys. So, and I think just overall, teams seem to feel better about the depth of this class, like the day 2, day 3 talent, or more so day 2 talent, early day 3 talent than they do. Like you said, there's only a couple guys at the very top of the draft that really get people going, but I do think people feel pretty good about the depth of the draft.
It does seem like the quarterbacks this year. Last year there was a big run on them, in the 1st round. This year I think it'll be the 2nd round. We'll see a lot of guys going in those first 10 picks in the 2nd round, I think, and we'll see what. Like you mentioned, Dart, and he was a guy who was supposed to go to the draft on Thursday. Now he's not going to go. Maybe he heard something where he may not get drafted in the 1st round. And we talked about Shedeur Sanders, big question mark how far he falls. Then after that, Miro's a big wild card. I mean, teams like him because he can run the ball really well, and he's more of a project throwing the ball. But again, he can be an impact for you now in terms of his running the ball. So it's a guy. he's also going to the draft on Thursday night, so maybe he's heard some first round buzz. So there's a lot of question marks. You mentioned Tyler Shuck's a guy getting a lot of buzz right now, a guy who's probably the best thrower of that second bunch, and a guy who's been bounced around a little bit. He's been, I think, 7 years in college, been 3 schools, but was a top chip prospect at every one of those places. The guy has the elite talent you want in a quarterback. He's a guy who's been mentioned also up there with even Quinn Ewers is getting some buzz now. So that second round is going to be interesting as far as these quarterbacks go and where teams decide they want to take a stand and get a guy who might be their guy going forward.
Yeah, I saw somebody post. I forgot who it was. It was a Saints beat writer, but Tyler Shuck is so old that he lined up with Juwan Johnson, the Saints tight end, is on his 3rd contract at Oregon at one point. So that just shows you how old he is. But I mean, he's gone through a ton of injuries, and there's a lot of developmental quarterbacks in this league that need a year to sit, like Milroe and Dart. But Shuck is one of the guys that could probably come in and play right away. And I mean, he better. He's like 26 years old. So.
I'm about to say, I hope so. Shit, he's about 30 years old. Yeah, if he ain't ready now, he ain't never gonna be ready. So
age is only a number, man. All this ageism going on here. 26 is young, baby.
I mean, with NIL, like the age for quarterbacks, like it's more acceptable to be a 23, 24-year-old, but 26, 27, pushing it a little too far. But we'll see. I mean, I don't know if his agent is doing a really good job, but there's some first round buzz around Tyler Shuck. But anyways, the Raiders will likely not draft him. So let's talk about Colton Miller's holdout. For a while, Colton Miller was playing on a very team-friendly deal. I mean, I believe he was the 15th highest as far as average per year. And to me, he's a top 10 tackle. He's not in that elite tier, but he was playing below his play level was above his pay grade, and now he wants to kind of even that out a little bit, and it seems like he might be headed for a holdout.
Yeah, it's early. I mean, we're in the voluntary offseason program portion of OTAs, and so he's not the only player that's not there currently, but he is not there because he's seeking a new contract, and I think it makes sense. I mean, he's going into the last year of his deal. He's set to make around $12 million this year, and none of that money is guaranteed. So as much as he is seeking a raise, I think he's also seeking a little bit more security, given that he's coming off he had that shoulder injury in 2023, had surgery and then played through it at the start of last year and gutted it out and ended up being there for every game. So, he's turning 30 in October. He's getting a little bit older. So it's typically when guys want more security. And as you mentioned, he's been on a bargain deal for a while now. And I think it makes sense for him in terms of whether the Raiders want to do it or not. We'll kind of have to wait and see. I asked Spytek about it today, and he pretty much gave a no comment. So, I know ESPN reported that the Raiders and Miller haven't started negotiations yet. So, but we're a long way away from the season. We'll see if that changes at any point, even before mandatory minicamp in June.
I think when you're a veteran player and you come in, there's a new regime, you kind of want to see where you stand. And with Colton's case, last year had that shoulder injury coming off, and he had a rough start to the year. He got better as the year went on, but clearly wasn't up to his usual level for most of that season. So I think he wants to see what they think of him. If he is, not long-term, but at least, 3 or 4 year guy for them at left tackle, or they're going to draft somebody else or sign somebody else to take his job at some point. So this is a good way for him to kind of, hey, this is where I'm at. What do you guys want to do with me? Are we talking, or are we going to talk at some point? Kind of give me like a calendar of what you guys think and where I fit in and what kind of money we might be, able to agree on. So I think for them, obviously they're going through the draft right now, so it's not a high priority for John Spytek, but I'm sure in the coming weeks they'll probably get back to it and talk to him and say, hey, man, this is what we think. We got a guy in the 3rd round as a possible future left tackle. We're not going to lock you up long term, but we'd like to have you back for this 1 year. And you kind of go from there. So I think it's kind of a feeling out process. So I think a holdout in the voluntary camp makes sense for both sides.
Yeah, I mean, I think you should pay Miller. I mean, this team has enough holes as it is. He's been a stalwart on an offensive line for a long time. And left tackles typically age well. Like he's not going to fall off a cliff anytime soon. And I think he's a guy that takes care of his body. So you could sign him to a 3-4 year deal and make him happy and keep your left side solid and worry about the other holes in your roster.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Spytech, I think it was the owners' meetings. He talked about this. Like sometimes it's better to extend your guys early to get out ahead of it. And we saw the Raiders kind of pay for not doing that this past offseason or this offseason that we're in currently because, last year they had a few guys that were on expiring deals. Nate Hobbs, Trayvon Merrick, Robert Spillane, who they didn't extend before the season. And then once free agency came around, all those players were way more expensive than they anticipated them being. And so usually if you get out there early, you get guys cheaper than if you wait, for free agency. So, but, it just comes down to whether or not they want him to be that left tackle there for the future. And same thing probably goes for a player like Jacoby Myers, who's going into the last year's deal.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think they have that luxury of saying, "Oh, let's go get younger at that position." They have so many needs on this roster. But speaking of the draft, let's get into what we're going to do today. Is we're going to do a little mini mock draft, and we're going to get to 6, and then discuss what we would do when we get there. So, at number 1, Tashan is going to pick for the Titans. Who's your pick?
Yeah, man, our old friend Dave Ziegler finally gets to, draft a quarterback in the first round. But I have them going with Cam Ward, quarterback out of Miami. I mean, it's pretty obvious that's what they're going to do. How they behaved in free agency, they invested in the offensive line. They've already invested a lot of receiver, and I know some people are higher on Cam Ward than others, but I think ideally, if he pans out, he could be like a top 10 to 15 quarterback. If they develop him properly, and so. I think that's pretty easy pick for them. It's what most people expect to happen, and then we go on to the Cleveland Browns at number 2.
I got the Browns. I think the Browns are going to try not to screw this one up. I think it's a pretty easy choice for them now that they've done all their homework. I think they get the best player in the draft. The best player in the draft is Travis Hunter. He can play. They can decide if he's going to play mostly receiver, mostly cornerback, or some of both. It's a great problem to have. I think he's a great. That's a good PR move. The fans get excited about him after a rough couple of years there in terms of all of Deshaun Watson mess. So I think he's a foundation piece of the franchise for a long time, and I think it's a home run pick.
Yeah, I think there's, like we mentioned, only a small group of really elite prospects, and Abdul Carter is one of them. So for the Giants, I'm going to add Abdul Carter to their defensive line and really build out a strong 4-man pass rush for them. I think he just has special movement skills, played through an injury throughout the playoffs, and I think he's a 10-sack guy as soon as he hits the field.
Yeah, I think at number 4 with the Patriots, they've obviously have a young quarterback in Drake May, and I think he flashed some bright spots last year, but we also saw him get hit entirely too much. Some of that might have been his own issues, maybe trying to do too much, but the offensive line was just bad. And I think, really if they don't protect him, we've seen quarterbacks get kind of, get their confidence knocked out of them, so I think they go with Will Campbell out of LSU, the left tackle, shore up his blind side and invest in the trenches.
At 5, we got the Jags. I think they're probably thinking about Ashen Genty. I think it's an intriguing option for them, but they have some running backs already. I think it's they got a new GM there trying to do things the right way. So I think they go with the trenches. I think they get Mason Graham. They have some nice pieces on the edges already. This gives them a nice, pretty solid front line. I think he's a guy who's one of the blue chip guys you mentioned as the prospects who people think is a top 5, top 6 guy who I don't say can't miss, but shouldn't miss. I think he's a guy with high motor and can both play the run and the pass. I've heard like Christian Wilkins comps for him. I think that's a good comp. So I think the Jags take Mason Graham at 5.
Yeah, I think when we get to the Jags, that's where things will get a little bit more interesting because there's more buzz right now that it could be a team that takes Ashen Genty. So if they take Ashen Genty, that kind of takes obviously he's not in conversation for the Raiders anymore, but Vic did the boring thing and took took Mason Graham. So now we have an interesting discussion at 6. To me, I mean, I've gone back and forth on this, and if you guys follow me, you probably know this. I've gone back.
We both follow you, yeah. Both Tashan and I follow you, so yeah.
Okay, cool. You guys haven't unfollowed me. That's a good sign. But I mean, I just think I'm going Membu. Membu. The right tackle from Missouri. I think he has special movement traits. I think he's the chance to be one of the better or best right tackles in the league with his movement skills. To me, he's like a Christian Darrisaw on a right side, and I think Darrisaw is a guy that the Raiders regret passing on. But I just think he has special movement skills for offensive lineman and a mean streak, and you combine those things together, I think you can have an all-pro type of offensive lineman. And if you get him, you could possibly bump Glaze down to guard, and then that opens up more possibilities too. So I think with Geno Smith, they just did not protect him in Seattle, and I think that has to be the top priority over everything for this regime. So I'm gonna go Membu.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it comes down between Membu, Genty, and then Shadur Sanders. I know people have kind of soured on him a little bit, but I do think that's taking a quarterback is still on the table. This high, maybe not, but at some point in the draft, I do think the Raiders want to take a developmental guy to groom behind Geno Smith. And they also might just be saying that to get somebody to trade up. We'll see when the draft comes around, but I think I'll go with Genty, man. I think I was leaning towards where Ted was like a week or two ago, but I just think at this point he's going to probably clearly be the best player available on their board. I know our draft analyst Dane Brugler has him number 3, and on our consensus big board, which compiles a bunch of different big boards across the industry, he's number 3, and I think he's the guy that he's going to be a difference maker. Obviously, he needs the Raiders' offensive line to help pave the way for him and their passing game to get going in order to, avoid it being a situation like it was for Josh Jacobs back in 2023 where he couldn't do anything. Obviously, that wasn't Josh Jacobs' fault because he went on and had a big year with the Packers last year. And so running backs can't do it by themselves. Nobody really can on offense. So I think they have to really target offensive line pretty aggressively on day 2 to fortify that position because they started to get a little bit better towards the end of last season, but they still were they were bad offensive line last year, like just overall. And really the only major addition they've made so far is signing guard Alex Kappa, who's coming off some pretty rough seasons. So unless they just have like the best offensive line coach in the league or something, like there's not really a huge reason to believe this offensive line is going to take a big jump. And so I think they have to add some talent. And at this point in free agency, there's not a ton of great offensive linemen available. So it's going to have to come through the draft, and I think that'll have to be their top priority going into day 2.
I'm going to go with Texas tackle Kelvin Banks. No. I'm kidding. I'm going Genty. I think I like Banks, but I think the tackle thing will be interesting the first 2 or 3 rounds. But I've come around also. I think Genty's the guy. I think they've kind of convinced themselves he's a generational guy. Like you hear the council, Danian Tomlinson, Marshall Faulk, Maurice Jones-Drew, a guy that can come in and kind of get you going, get your offense going by himself, which is what they need. And he'd be a nice piece with Brock Bowers, kind of young foundation of the offense. I think it's interesting that I think Genty was on NFL Network a few days ago and said that of all the teams he's talked to, the Raiders definitely were the most kind of focusing on character and those kind of traits and kind of like off the field stuff. And he thought he's a fit there. I think they've stressed that as well. Like they told us that that's what they're looking for, guys who compete and are leaders and kind of guys who can take a room to the next level. So I think he is that guy also, not despite, but along with his skills on the field, he's clearly, a special back. So even in this year of a lot of running backs, a lot of options, they go for the best one, I think, at 6.
And I think another part of it for me, like with the running backs thing, like we talk about how good the rest of this running back class is, like the rest of the league knows that too, So like you can say wait until the second round at 37 to go get Henderson or Judkins from Ohio State, but those guys could be gone. Like, it could be around that position, late first round or early second round. So it's easy to say, but you could also end up coming around at 37 and you don't like any other running backs that are available, and now you have to roll into the season with Raheem Mostert as your number 1, which I don't think is really ideal at this point in his career. So I'm not saying that they couldn't still find a guy, on day 2 or day 3 that could contribute, but there could be a pretty substantial drop off from Genty to whoever is available in the second round. So I think that factored into it too for me.
Yeah, I love Henderson. Henderson's one of my favorite guys in his draft. I think he's awesome, but I would be a little scared he wouldn't be there at 37 if I was trying to be crafty and wait for a running back. He's the guy I probably want at 37. So that also was a factor for me as well.
Yeah, I think it's harder to get a tackle in the second round. We've seen that historically. There's definitely going to be a drop off after the first round. And Spytek also talked about that, about how his decision when he's with the Browns about with Joe Hayden and a safety and being able to target a safety they liked in the second round, so they ended up going with Joe Hayden with that top pick. And it's going to be a similar situation. I think, there could be a chance there's a huge run on running backs, but I think that's a chance you should be willing to take, especially with how rare tackles are and how hard they are to get. So, I mean, but at the same time, even if you're a guy that is rooting for them to take Membu or Graham or whoever else, if they end up taking Genty, like, you shouldn't be mad, you shouldn't be mad to get Genty. He's going to be a star in this league. So I think fortifying the offensive line is a smart thing to do. And I think Membu is special enough, or he has special enough traits to where I can justify taking him over Genty and just building out that offensive line and protecting Geno.
Yeah, talk about Genty again. Like, I talked to Mauricio Shu last week or 2 weeks ago about him and do a story on the running backs, and he had a good point. Like, you look at the Boise State roster, and it's Genty and a bunch of future Amazon drivers and future U-Haul drivers, and so just there's not much talent in that team besides him, and he took him pretty far. So I think that shows you just kind of what caliber. And he compared to Marshall Faulk at San Diego State, the guy who kind of took a bunch of guys who were not really of that caliber to a higher level. I think that makes you excited about his future in the NFL when he has some real guys around him.
Yeah, and for people that are saying, "Oh, look at the Penn State game. He looked like an average running back in the Penn State game." Did you see the Penn State game? He was getting hit by like 3 people in the backfield. He broke 16 tackles. I think that's like a record in that game, and still was able to get 100 yards. So, that's not a reason not to take him. But Genty is a special back. Wouldn't be mad to get him, but to me, building out the trenches is important, and I'm sure that is going to be a conversation that will be ongoing for this regime all the way up until draft day. So we'll see what they do.
Either way, they're really good options. I think if they got Genty or they got Membu. Membu's a great prospect. I think he definitely is an elite tackle in this draft. I think Mason Graham's a guy who definitely kind of give them what they want in terms of that Eagles type front line of guys rotate in and out and kind of all have impact and kind of get after the quarterback. So I think either of those 3, to me, is a really good pick.
Yeah, and also in Tampa Bay, they picked Tristan Wirf to play on the right side, and he was an all-pro at that right side for a long time. And then this season, they kicked him to left tackle, and he was one of the best left tackles in the league. So maybe that's that could be they have a similar plan with Membu and Miller. But let's talk about round 2. Who should the Raiders prioritize on day 2 of the draft?
Like I said, I think if they kind of depends on what they do in the first round, obviously. But if we haven't taken Genty, I think in the second round, top priority would be offensive tackle. It would also depend. Like I think Pete Carroll said today, like, you don't want to force it. And so, while this is a pretty deep tackle class, I think Dane Brugler had 9 tackles with a 3rd round grade or higher, but he also had 12 cornerbacks with a 3rd round grade or higher. And I think cornerback is a pretty significant need for the Raiders as well. Like, even if you feel good about the outside cornerbacks, and they don't have anybody at nickelback, and so I think those are probably the top 2 positions that jump out. But they shouldn't have to force it at either one of those spots on day 2, just because both of those positions are pretty deep in this draft. And so my guy that I really like at cornerback is Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky. He can play both outside and inside, has good speed. He's not the biggest guy, but he has, the athleticism and speed to compete on outside as well. And then I think a tackle there's a few guys. It kind of just depends who falls. Connerly out of Oregon is starting to get a lot of buzz, so maybe he goes in the first round. Ursery out of Minnesota, Donovan Jackson, who Chip Kelly, coach at Ohio State, is another option at tackle. So, I don't know how the Raiders have those players slotted on their draft board, but I think in second round, it's the best offensive tackle or cornerback on your board, and then third round, whichever one you don't get in the second round. So that's probably how I try to go about it.
Yeah, I agree. I really like Usher, the tackle at Minnesota. I think he's definitely a guy who I think could be an impact guy quicker than later. I think he'd be a good pick. I think, like you said, there's a lot of cornerbacks in this draft at that point. I think there's so many needs they can fill with guys who can come in and play right away. We'll talk about some of the guys later in our unsung, under the radar guys that we will point out, but one of those guys also could be an option in round 2. So, and again, the quarterbacks, I think if somehow Shadur Sanders is there, I think they're going to take him. Jackson Dart, same thing. I think after that, Milroe and Ewers, I think that's a debate. I think they'll definitely something that they'll talk about maybe because they want a guy to kind of have the groom under Geno for a couple of years and be ready in year 3. So I think there's going to be a real talk about quarterbacks in round 2 based on who's there.
Yeah, I think the quarterbacks, I might be a little surprised in round 2. I think round 3 kind of might make more sense if somebody falls there. But another position to think about is receiver, because I think that's also probably a pretty glaring need. Like Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker are the only 2 starting caliber guys. And Tucker, you could argue, is more of a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. And this receiver class doesn't have like the high-end talent that we've seen the last couple of years, but it is a pretty deep one. And so there should be a few starting caliber guys available on day 2 as well. They could go a few different ways, which good thing for them is that, the draft is pretty deep at a few of the spots that they need. But the difficult part for them is you need all this stuff. So how do you kind of decide which one do we go for, So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah. A few things. I don't get the Quinn Ewers love, especially in day 2 or day 3. I just did my quarterback rankings on The Athletic. I had him ranked as a 10th quarterback. I mean, unless there's some people that might think that he needs to really recover from all the injuries that he's dealt with in college to look like, there was a point where people thought he could have been a top pick in the first round. But just watching him, man, like he just does not look like a NFL quarterback to me. I mean, he's just missing throws deep. I mean, but he had some NFL caliber receivers. I guess he's nimble, but I just don't see a guy that you should draft in the second, third round. So I don't get the Raiders' love for him, but maybe they think he could be a different quarterback if he recovers.
Yeah, I was with you. I was definitely skeptical. I still am a little bit, but I think the Raiders thing for him is there's definitely strong ties between Steve Sarkisian and Pete Carroll. Pete was one of his mentors going back at USC. I think that, and Sarkisian's thing is that in terms of like the knowledge of an offense and progressions and reading a defense, Ewers is probably the best guy because he's had an NFL type coach in college. I think he had a lot of injuries he played through the last couple of years. So he showed his toughness, I guess, versus not playing that well last year. And yeah, you go back, he had some road wins at Alabama and Michigan, which are 2 hard places to win in his career. So I think he's had some positive things where you can kind of like, maybe there's more here than we saw last year. And he's got, he's definitely got a good arm. But I think it's more about, my guess is, I'm not in these meetings, interviews, but my guess is that he did better in the chalkboard sessions than guys like Sanders and Dart and those kind of guys. I think he probably stood out in this little last 2 or 3 months in terms of interviews and talking to coaches about. That's where he excelled, probably as far as his knowledge of what's going on and reading an defense and knowing an offense and learning it pretty quickly.
Yeah, and another idea I want to float out to you guys, just see what you guys think. Corner's a big need. The Dolphins have came out and said they're probably going to trade away Jalen Ramsey. Jalen Ramsey, you might think he's a little too old to play outside, but he's still a elite player on the inside at nickel and maybe could kick out a little bit. Obviously, he would be the best available player the Raiders can get outside of the draft. I think he has an out in his contract next year, even though he'll probably get paid a lot this year, and they have the cap room. What do you guys think? Would you guys pull the trigger if they wanted a 4th, 5th round draft pick for Jalen Ramsey?
I would. I think for me, like a 4th rounder for Jalen Ramsey, I don't know, maybe they just love the 4th rounders in this class.
But I don't know O'Connell. He'd be a backup that fits in their system.
That's gonna do it.
Yeah.
They're on the fence.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Whoever's
I'm sure
Hayden.
that's. I don't know why he went with Aiden O'Connell. I think the biggest thing with Jalen Ramsey, more so than his age or his level of play, is going to be the contract. I think it's a little bit tricky because I think he's still due about $20 million this year. And while the Raiders do have $42 million in cap space, like it is still a pretty big chunk to take on, especially considering they still have to sign their rookies to their rookie contracts as well. And so maybe they want the Dolphins to be willing to eat some of the money in order to get that draft pick. And then the other part of it is like, does Ramsey want to play for the Raiders? Like, I'm sure at this point in his career, he'd like to be on a team that's more of a contender type team. And we've seen a few times now that when Jalen Ramsey wants to go, he can be pretty annoying to deal with if you're a team that has him on your roster. So I don't think they would want to add that headache if they don't think he would want to be with the Raiders. So there's a few things up in the air, but like if he wants to be there, I would send a four for Jalen Ramsey. I don't see why not.
I would pass. I think that's more of a win now kind of move. You're going for it this year. I think they kind of made it pretty clear they're not going for it this year. They're kind of like they want to improve this year. They feel the quarterback need. But they're not all in based on you look at the free agency moves they made. They're kind of taking it more of like, year two. Year two is really going to like take off, and we're going to try to build something this year, get some guys in, have a second draft next year, then attack free agency. And we'll have a chance to really compete for the division, I think, next year. So to me, Jalen Ramsey does not fit in that calendar. I think you mentioned the contract will be an issue at some point, if not this year, next year. I don't know how long he wants or how much he's going to want. I'm sure it's a lot. And they're really going to hit your wagon to Jalen Ramsey for next 4 years at his age. I don't know. That seems to me like a dicey deal. So I would, again, great player. Would definitely have an impact this year. Fourth round pick is not a bad price to pay, but I would pass. I would take a guy in the fourth round and hope to strike gold.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an out after this year, so you would pay a lot this year, but it'd be kind of a 1-year deal. So I mean, it does, fill a need, and you wouldn't have to draft a nickel or corner. You could kind of go a lot of offense in the first few rounds of the draft. Yeah, just an idea. I think he'd be interested in wearing the black and silver. I think you convince him with Pete Carroll and Geno Smith that maybe this team can contend a little earlier than people think. But anyways, back to the second round, because I did the wise thing and drafted a tackle. I'm not grasping at straws like you guys. I could look at I could look at all these running backs: Caleb Johnson, Trayvon Henderson, Judkins, and pick one of those guys. I mean, I would love Judkins in this offense. Obviously, experienced with Chip Kelly. But yeah, I mean, I think Judkins as every down back would fit a little bit more than Henderson. Henderson, obviously, amazing speed. But I have some questions to whether he could be a every down back, whereas I think Judkins is a sure thing. You put him in, and he's going to be a guy that produces for you for a long time.
Interesting.
All right, let's look at under the radar players we like in the draft. Tashan, why don't you go first?
Yes, I think one of the guys probably around 4 I want to try to get is Billy Bowman out of Oklahoma. He played safety there, but he also played nickel. And I think with the Raiders, he'd probably play nickel this year, given that they have a pretty big void there. But long term, if they wanted to transition him back to safety, they could as well. I think he could be a pretty good starter. And he's a smaller guy. He's about 5'10", so he's not the biggest safety. That's why I think he'd have a better spot at nickel. But I think that would fill a pretty major need. A later pick, probably like a 6th-rounder type guy, is Dante Thornton out of Tennessee. He's a receiver. He's a big guy, 6'4", 6'5", ran like a 4.3 40-yard dash, played at Tennessee. They basically run 4 verts every play. So he got to show that he's a deep threat there. And the Raiders don't really have that skill set in their receiver room. Trey Tucker's a fast guy, but he's only like 5'8". And so a big body who could win on the outside and has that real legitimate deep threat speed. He could be a potential, end of the draft guy that ends up being sort of a sleeper hit, even if he's a a situational player that only comes in certain situations, I think that's a win if you get that kind of production from a 6-rounder. And then probably more of another 4th-round type guy, 5th-round guy is Za Frazier out of UTSA. He's a cornerback. He's actually one of the players that the Raiders hosted on a visit leading up to the draft. He kind of fits that mold of Pete Carroll's type of defensive back. He's like 6'3", ran like a 4.3, long arms, good ball production. He's physical. He's just pretty raw. So he's a little bit kind of similar to DeCameron Richardson, and so maybe he's too redundant, but I don't know how they feel about DeCameron Richardson, given they didn't draft him. So but those are my 3 guys.
All right, who's next? Me. I'll go next. So I think in round 3, maybe, if you're really aggressive, maybe in round 2, but around 3, I think I like Jacob Parrish. He's a slot corner out of Kansas State. I think that's one of the Raiders' biggest needs. I think it would become a strength overnight if you got him. I think he's a guy who can cover, he can tackle, he makes plays on the ball, he has a little attitude, he's got good twitch. I just think he attaches well to receiver. Everything you want in the slot corner, this guy can do, and I think he has that little nasty streak, which you kind of want also. So I think his tape is pretty phenomenal. So I kind of fell in love with Jacob Parrish as a guy who could really turn things around for you in your slot corner department. Second guy is a guy I've talked about, I think, all draft season, is Isaiah Bond, receiver out of Texas. He's a guy who thought he was going to run the fastest 40, but didn't quite do it at the combine, but he's still plenty fast. And I like his tape. I think he's underrated. I think he, you mentioned Ewers not having, the great year last year, and I think Bond kind of suffered for that, but I think he runs routes well. He's got good hands, good hips. I think everything you want in a guy who I think is really good value at this point. And also there's an X factor now because he's had some legal issues the last few weeks. He's suing a woman who he says had some false arrests, some false statements about some sexual misconduct. So I think that's a big question mark now. I'm sure you do your homework, but he's suing this woman over these charges. So who knows how that turns out. But I just think there's a lot of question marks there. But on the other side, if you get through this and you get him in round 3 or round 4, whatever he falls, I think you have a real potential a diamond in the rough. My third guy is way late. If we do, because we all talk about this draft and the running backs and how there's there's Genty and there's this group of 6 or 7 guys who could possibly start and how it's so deep. I think it's deep all the way through. So if you want to wait till like round 6 or 7, a guy I really like is LaQuint Allen out of Syracuse. He really popped out to me at the combine, and also I think at the Senior Bowl. Just he's a guy who looks like he's all legs, but he runs well. He's got some burst, and I think, to me, the things that really you hear about from scouts and people around the league is that his pass blocking is elite. Like when we talk Henderson, that's one of the things that he's like one of the best pass blockers, in years. I think Allen's kind of the same kind of guy who can play all 3 downs if he has to. But in this case, probably a 3rd down guy who can come in, pass block, and I think last year he had 64 catches last year, so he can catch the ball, can run. So I like him a lot as a guy in a 6th round kind of sleeper pick.
All right, I like it. Nickel corners, pass blocking, running backs. Man, you guys are in the trenches.
We are.
For me, the Raiders have been talking about getting a developmental quarterback, and this is an obvious one. But I really like Will Howard. I think I have Will Howard ranked higher than most people. He's a big quarterback. He's a running threat. I think he goes through his progressions. He ran a multiple offense with Chip Kelly, coming from a kind of more simplistic offense at Kansas, where they were just running the quarterback a ton. So this is his first year in a kind of a pro style type of offense, and I thought he just got better and better. And his final 4 games at stretch, it's probably as good as any quarterback in this class. But can he take that and extend it? We don't know. I think Chip Kelly probably has a better answer. So if he does prioritize him, and I think you probably get him in a 3rd, 4th round, it'll tell you a lot about what Chip Kelly thinks, because he was there in that developmental stage. So I think he has the size, the tools, and the mental makeup to be a good quarterback, to keep developing under Geno Smith. I think he has to rework his mechanics, which led to some misses. But even with those bad mechanics, he completed like 70% of his passes. But there were some bad misses on film, and he was really bad at the combine. But that's a whole nother conversation. But I do think getting a chance to sit behind Geno, reworking his mechanics, I think will be the best thing for him. And I like DJ Giddens a lot. I watched a lot of Kansas State because I like their offense and some of those run concepts. And Giddens to me was one of my favorite guys to watch all of last season. I think he has really good vision. He ran a 4.4 at the combine. Does a good job of setting up his backs. I think he could play in the zone scheme. He could play in a gap scheme, which fits what Chip wants to do. Not a great receiver. He'll drop some passes, which will probably drop him in the draft. But as far as just a pure runner, I think he's one of the better ones, and you could get him in the mid rounds, which kind of shows the depth of this running back class. And finally, linebacker from Cal, your alma mater, who I got to watch a lot this season, Teddy Buchanan. I think he's got good quickness, 4.6 speed, really good read and react type of guy. Could struggle to get off blocks, but he's a guy that could potentially come in and compete for a starting position, especially with the Raiders linebacker depth the way it is.
I love that guy. I think he's going to be a good player, so I think it's a good pick.
All right. Well, I think this draft has ran long enough. Do you guys want to take questions, or should we do that another time?
How about three, guys? Are there three of them?
Okay, we'll do 3 questions.
Yeah, we only got 2 so far.
All right.
All right.
2.
From Easy Almec, do you guys think Michael Mayer is still on this roster by week 1? If not, when does he get traded?
I think so. I mean, I know they signed, I think Ian Thomas, tight end, was with the Panthers last year. Is kind of a depth guy, but they didn't really add anybody else in free agency, and I don't see that being a position that they draft at. So, even if they aren't as high on Michael Mayer as the previous staff was, I think having him as a number 2 tight end, especially given that they don't have a really, much strength at receiver right now. They're probably going to have to lean on 12 personnel pretty heavily unless they get another starting caliber receiver either through the draft or free agency. So I think they end up hanging on to Mayer.
I agree.
Yeah, unless you get a pretty good draft pick, which you probably won't get. I think Mayer's potential to develop into a pretty solid number 2 tight end is worth keeping him on a roster, and it just allows more flexibility what you want to do with the personnel packages. Second question, does Aiden get traded, Aiden O'Connell? If he does, for what round pick? He's getting traded to the Miami Dolphins for Jalen Ramsey with the 4th round pick. So he fits that offense. You make quick reads, anticipation. They need a backup quarterback with Tua's injury history. So I mean,
they signed Zach Wilson, right? Like, they don't need another guy that's the backup. They already got one of those guys.
Zach Wilson, Aiden's been better than Zach.
I don't know about that. It's about the same.
I think they do. I'll take it. I think they trade him. I think I don't know, 6th round pick, maybe even the 5th. It's going to depend on what teams miss on quarterbacks in this draft, but there are a lot of teams that need a backup, a guy. And Aiden, I think definitely has his pros and cons, but he definitely has experience. He's definitely come up big at times for the Raiders. I think he can show the locker room likes him. I think he's definitely is a good kid. Is well liked, and definitely. I think he got better last year than the first year. I mean, I'm not sure what that says in terms of his future as a possible starter, but I always thought he'd be a long-term backup. I think he will be. So I think if you are a team like the Vikings who need a backup quarterback and a veteran guy who can, help your young guy out and also maybe be an insurance policy if he gets hurt, I think Aiden for a 5th or 6th round pick makes sense. And I think the Raiders are going to get a quarterback, if not in this draft. I think they will in this draft, but if not, they can sign someone afterwards. But I think they're not super high in Aiden. It's a new regime. It happens. So I think if they can find him a new home, they will this weekend or next weekend. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of tough. I think he ends up sticking on the roster, just given, that it sounds like there's going to be a run on quarterbacks early in the 2nd round. I don't know what caliber of guys is going to be available later that you feel that much better than Aiden about. So I think right now we'll see how the draft goes, but I think for right now I say he sticks.
I mean, they keep talking about drafting a developmental quarterback. So if the draft falls the way that they wanted to, and they get a developmental quarterback like Will Howard in the 5th round or whatever, then I can see them trading Aiden O'Connell. I mean, it just, it would seem if they get a developmental guy, then Aiden gets pushed out.
They're not going to cut him. I mean, they don't
Yeah.
hate the guy. I'm saying if there's value, if they find they find someone who wants him, then I think they'll say yes.
Yeah, I mean, to me, he's a good backup quarterback, and that's kind of people are looking for a good backup. So, I mean, if you get a pick for him, that'd be good if you got your developmental guy. All right, last question from Space Beast. Have you seen Brady in the building? Heard mumblings about players talking about him. Feel like Mark is taking a back seat.
I have not seen him physically with my own eyes, but I know he's been there at different points this offseason. They had meetings at Team HQ before they traded for Geno Smith, and he was there when Max Crosby signed his extension. And John Spike got asked today who's going to be in the war room, and he was kind of played coy about it. But I would expect Brady to at least be around for the first round. I'd be a little surprised if he's not. But you are correct about Mark taking a back seat when it comes to football decisions. He's pretty much leaving it to that trio of Spytek, Carroll, and Brady.
Yeah, as Spytek and Carroll, the guys definitely who are there every day. I think Brady comes and goes once in a while and makes his presence felt, and maybe a big phone call guy. He's always apparently available to talk with the bigwigs about what's happened next. But I think he'll be there on Thursday night for the first round. And to me, it'd be nice to kind of somehow get a peek into that war room, see what happens when the pick comes up between Pete and John and Tom, who gets the last say and what their votes are. But I do think he'll be a presence, at times in the building, and definitely I think on draft night.
Do you think he'll be in a war room?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, well, Mark has definitely let Brady take the wheel, and I think it's a wise choice just based on the results of him being in total control for this long. But yeah, that's all we have for you guys today. Are we going to record again next week?
Probably do something live around once the draft actually gets rolling, I think.
All right.
Yeah, so maybe Thursday night or Friday.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Talk to you guys at the draft, and we'll see what happens. If they go trenches or they go fantasy football and get Genty.
Or draft a quarterback.
Thanks for joining us. What?
Or draft a quarterback. Yeah, definitely still drafting a quarterback. Yep, for sure.
Oh God, I think people will be mad if they get a quarterback. All right, we will talk to you guys later. Thanks for joining us.
All right, y'all.
Hasta la vista.